Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday Instagram Live broadcast at Topless Creek. I'm Jason Haas, as always. I am really excited to welcome writer Kathleen Wilcox today. She will be my guest, and I know her byline has been on several of the most interesting articles that I have read in the last year. So I can't wait for you to meet her. But while we wait for everyone to join, as I usually do, I want to give you all a little visual tour of what's going on here at the vineyard and the winery. So first thing I want to do is show you a little bit of what the weather is like. So you see those things in the sky? Those are clouds. This is a change in the weather. We have had the classic Paso Robles blue sky and lots of sun for, well, really all summer, until about a week ago when all of a sudden we got clouds in the sky, the nights got down around freezing. We had a couple little tiny showers come through. We got 1/100th of an inch of rain day before yesterday. And that seems to be a precursor for what might be our first real winter storm coming this weekend. So that is the big news. What's been going on in the winery, though, is all the stuff that you would expect as we finish up harvest. So a couple pictures first. We finished harvest yesterday. So you may have seen on social media, we shared a picture of the last bin, which was Roussanne. It's somewhat unusual that Roussanne should finish up harvest. It's always one of the later ones, but typically we figured we would finish with Mourvèdre. This year, Roussanne, just because it took so many picks to get through the Roussanne blocks, because there was a lot of uneven ripening, that's where we ended up. So we are done. It looks like we are down by about a quarter, which is a little better than I had been worried that we were earlier in the harvest. Mourvèdre came in at almost the same levels as last year, which is great. So seems like maybe we were a little more down on the early stuff. Of course, the cellar work is still going. This is us pressing off a Mourvèdre tank today. We're also getting our equipment out and washed and put away. The cellar is opening up. But there's still going to be another 2 or 3 weeks of daily punch downs, pump overs, all of the normal work of processing the grapes that have come in. A couple more pictures. In the vineyard, you can see we're starting to get things kind of colored up. You can see some of the fall colors. This is in a Counoise block. We're also starting to prep the ground for the rain, so get cover crop seeds planted and just make sure that things are in good shape for that rain that's coming. I think it's interesting to contrast what you see there with Grenache. So you can see that the Counoise, which is kind of autumn colored, looks tired. Grenache looks like it could go another round. This is a block that we picked a month ago. It's always so green and so vibrant. There are a few little second crop clusters out on the vines. I got a picture of one of those Counoise clusters. These are things that's flowered a little later, weren't ripe enough for us to want to pick. Our animals, as they go through the vineyard in the coming weeks, there'll be little snacks for them. And then one last picture that I thought would be fun, just an overview. This is us looking up towards our tallest hill from our second tallest hill. So you're looking through some Muscardin vines, across a Tannat block, across a head train Counoise, and then up with that road disappearing towards the horizon. We've got Counoise on the front, we've got Grenache to the right and left, and then a new Mourvèdre block up at the top of the hill. So it's feeling like autumn. Which lasts usually like 2 or 3 weeks here. And then when we get our first big rain, it'll start to feel like winter. So we're right on that crux. And this weekend, so Sunday into Monday, is supposed to be that first real storm. And we're hoping it's something big. We could definitely use it. Okay, so I'm going to ask Kathleen to join now. Okay, Kathleen, if you are watching, it looks like they've changed this around a little bit. If you are on already, you should be able to make a request to join. Let me see if I can. So Kathleen. Nope. It's all okay. So you used to be able to just add anyone, even 2 weeks ago, you could add anyone who was there watching. Okay, great. There's Kathleen. Terrific. So we just sent off the request, keeping abreast on the changes that our social media platforms make with their user tools is always exciting. Hello.
Hi, how
How
are
are
you?
you?
Good.
I'm doing
I'm
great.
so glad that you finished up harvest. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, we would normally finish this time of year, and if you'd asked me 3 weeks ago, I would have said, "Oh, it'll be easily done by this week." But those last little bits of Morvedra and Roussan, they just took their time, and where there wasn't really any pressure until now, so we could just afford to wait.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm also, you said you were down about 25%, but the quality's excellent. That's kind of the word across the board everywhere. They're down, but the quality's high.
Yeah, I mean, California at least. I mean, it was dry across the state, so everybody's
Right.
dealing with those same issues that
Right.
I mean, we were something like 60% of normal rainfall. It was
Right.
also cold this past winter, which I think that may have even had a bigger effect on us than the amount of rain. We had 43 frost nights over the winter, including a couple that came late in late March and early April. Not not bad enough to actually freeze things that had sprouted, but enough. We know the sap was already flowing, and we know that what tends to happen when you get those later frosts is that when the vines do sprout, they sprout kind of cautiously, and so we got smaller clusters with smaller berries. So we did cluster counts, and we're like, oh, we're about the same as last year. And then actually everything weighed a little bit less, and there was a little more skins compared to juice, and just ended up down by about a quarter in gallons.
All right. Well, I'm glad the quality was high. That's awesome.
Right. If it's going to be scarce, like you might
Yeah,
as well have good quality, right?
exactly.
Cool. Excellent. So the way that I usually like to have people start when they join for these conversations is just talk a little bit about their path into the world of wine. And with writers, I always also want to ask, sort of, which came first, like the wine or the writing? So
Well,
what
for
was it
me,
for you?
it definitely was the writing. I graduated from college. I moved home and I got a job at the community newspaper for an abysmal rate, but it was wonderful. It was great. I loved it. I'd go to these geeky town meetings and everyone would be, talking about salamanders and we can't do developments here. I mean, it was in Westchester County, so everyone was very environmentally conscious, which got me really into environmentalism early on in my career, which is one of my passions, as you know, and I know it's one of yours too. And then I moved to New York City and worked writing for finance for a number of years, which of course was, not really the dream. But it did teach me to write about data and understand how to write about really boring subjects in hopefully a more compelling way. And then I just slowly made my way into doing things that interested me, which is food and wine. And the thing about wine that really kind of captured my heart is that you can talk about culture, you can talk about history, and you can think about the environment and, very individual human stories. So that is to me just the ultimate.
And I think one of the things that makes wine, that all of what you said are things that make wine interesting to me. It is also sort of inextricably tied to place in a
Yes,
way that very few other things are. So whenever you're telling the story of a wine, you're also telling the story of a place.
exactly. And one thing that I didn't understand until I started visiting more wine regions is how important it is to be on the ground and to really see the space and to understand the culture. I mean, Paso, I visited Paso. I was lucky enough to visit and meet with you guys and a few years ago, and it really brought home how distinct Paso is. And
Yeah.
it's such a tight community. Everyone is so supportive. It's so entrenched in the food world too there,
Right.
which is super cool.
And you are, for people who don't know, you're in the Hudson Valley, right?
I'm I mean, it depends on who you ask. I'm in Saratoga Springs, which is maybe a
Right.
half an hour to some people north of the Hudson Valley, but that same general area. So I'm maybe 2.5 hours north of New York City, and a few hours away from the Finger Lakes. So it's a great location.
you're actually not very far from where I grew up. I grew up in southern Vermont, so
Oh yeah.
used to make trips over to the races in Saratoga Springs occasionally with friends when I was growing up.
Yeah, I mean, we love Vermont, and we're lucky to be about an hour away, which is wonderful.
Are there grapevines planted in and around Saratoga Springs, or is that further south and further west only?
It's further south and west, but there are a few wineries, and I have to say some of them are pretty good. As you know, the the challenges of grape growing in the Northeast are significant, especially in certain pockets. So you're not going to be growing your Cabernet Sauvignon here. I mean, it just like it's not going to work. But you can do hybrids, and I really want to get to. I don't know how much time you've spent exploring Vermont and all of the different really cool movements happening there with hybrid grapes. So that's something I'd like to
Not
explore.
enough is the
Yeah,
answer to that. I mean, I've spent a fair amount of time exploring Vermont ciders, but there were no vineyards there when I was growing up, and I just haven't. And I think most of what there is farther north, kind of in the Champlain Valley, where it's a little bit warmer than where I grew up in the mountains of southeastern Vermont.
right.
A little more viable to at least keep the vines alive over the winters. But like I've been reading stories, it sounds really cool.
It does. I mean, what they're doing is really interesting, and they're able because they're doing hybrids and they don't need to spray nearly as much. But, the reality is there still may be some spray regimes, but there are some really hardcore growers in Vermont and in the Hudson Valley, like Wild Ark, where they're just really pushing ahead with organics aggressively.
And you wrote a book about the wines of the Hudson Valley.
I did. I did with my co-author Tessa Edick, and it was a real labor of love because, as we know, again, it's not your classic wine region. It's very different, very individualistic, very rugged, and people like to do their own thing, which I appreciate, and I'm sure you do too. But it's definitely not as cohesive, and it certainly isn't as taken as seriously.
But there's a ton of history. I mean,
Yeah.
there's been grapevines planted there for hundreds of years.
Yeah, Brotherhood Winery is the first bonded winery
Huh.
in the US. I mean, some people disagree with that, but it's one of the oldest. Yeah, it's really cool.
Cool. And I think that's something maybe. I mean, I have sort of a bicoastal perspective because I grew up in New England and have been out here for 20 years. But I talked to a lot of people out in California who were kind of surprised that there's wine being made outside of the West Coast. That there's, I mean, obviously other countries, but in terms of American wine, they don't realize the length of the traditions or even how many wineries there are in places like New York and Virginia and Upper Peninsula of Michigan and I mean places
In New Jersey and Texas, I mean, this past year, I visited Virginia, New Jersey, and Texas. And I have to say, all three regions, I was completely inspired and blown away by the quality that I saw there. I mean, it really is possible to make good wine. But then the question is, do they either have to do it with hybrid grapes so that they can grow organically, or is there going to be some conventional farming methods, that maybe aren't ideal?
Yeah, I remember touring a vineyard in southwestern Virginia a long time ago, maybe 15 years ago now, and they were growing mostly Rhone varieties, and they were saying like, yeah, man, we would love to be able to farm organically, but like, forget it. I mean, the
Right.
weeds alone would do us in.
Right.
It's just not possible. And I remember coming back thinking, oh yeah, it's nice out here that it stops raining in April. I mean, yes, it can be hard in other ways, but it stops raining in April. So when you get rid of the weeds in May, they don't grow back. So you can
Exactly.
do a lot of things, but just because of the conditions, the Mediterranean climate in California it's just hard in the rest of the country.
But I also feel like you are a perfect example of someone who goes way beyond I mean, you have animals in the vineyard, you've got relationships. I mean, you're doing regenerative farming, you are, and one thing that I mean, I know that, I hope it's okay if I ask you, but I mean, you track your data, which I find really admirable in a way that I don't think other winemakers really do. And I mean, I'm curious how it all works. Like, when did you start really kind of digging in and analyzing everything? And how many people do you have dedicated to it besides yourself? Because it's a huge undertaking.
Well, I've always come into this with sort of the idea that you can't evaluate what you aren't measuring. And
Okay.
that's true whether it's vineyard information or winery information or tasting room sales information, business information. So my background is not it's not really a wine background. I mean, I grew up in a wine family. I grew up spending summers working in vineyards. If I didn't find myself another summer job, but I come at this out of the tech world. I spent 4 years managing a tech company out of college, out of grad school, and really came to believe that like I had to be keeping track of all of the things that I cared about if I wanted to have confidence in the decisions that I made. And
Right.
it helps that I have a team that understands that and believes in that. So, I mean, we're tracking. I was looking earlier today. We're trying to evaluate two Roussan blocks. Like we know that they both got some virus. We know that at some point we're going to need to replant them. But I was looking over the last 5 years, like what have we actually gotten off of each block? What have the numbers been? How productive have they been? How many times have we had to pick them? And we track all of that. We have every pick. We have full data on all of this going back to 2000. So if we want to go back and make the right decision, I don't feel like I'm just having to rely on what I remember or just having to rely on what our winemaker or our viticulturist remember. We can go back and confirm that against data. And you have to start with that in mind, or you have to make a decision at some point that that's important enough that you're going to do it. But I think coming at this kind of more from a business perspective than necessarily coming at it from an art or farming perspective, those are critical, but that's not my role. My role is to make sure that Tablas Creek makes sense as an operation, and that all of the pieces that we're working on are coordinated in a way that allows them to be successful.
Right, right. Yeah, it's really admirable. And I know a lot of people really look at what you guys do and hold you up as kind of a pillar of just good business, but also responsible business.
Thanks, and
Yeah.
it's something that we're proud of, and we've always thought of ourselves as kind of an open book. That if we can do what we're doing and share why we're doing it, it just makes it easier for other people to follow along this path. And that goes all the way back to decisions long before I got involved, like the decision early on by my dad and the Perrin brothers not to try to keep the grape varieties that we brought into the country, not try to keep them proprietary, but instead to make them available to any other grower that wanted to plant them. Like, feeling like that was something, it's kind of like open source software. Like if more people are using these grape varieties, these high quality clones, and it helps improve the overall quality and the reputation of the California Rhone category, like we benefit from this. This is not something that is going to harm us in any way. We felt confident about our own ability to stay at the forefront of the category, but we wanted the category to get better.
Right.
And I think we think the same thing, but even more so about the farming pieces that we're doing, whether that's the regenerative organic certification that we've been working on the last few years, or before that, dry farming or biodynamics, or any of the other things that we have done and continue to do. But we have the ability to influence 270 acres. I mean, that's our own property. That's the place where we can make a decision. But for things like fighting climate change, or helping make sure that water is generally available, or encouraging biodiversity, these things matter to the extent to which they're adopted more widely. And if we can share our own experiences and help people feel like this path is less intimidating, then that's something which benefits all of us.
It's very true. And I think it's also important that you guys are so upfront on social media. And honestly, I mean, having the pictures of the animals, I think that generates a lot of interest and inspiration too among, consumers, but also other producers. So
Yeah,
cool.
I mean the number of people who we see in Paso who have brought sheep into their vineyard over since we did a decade ago. There's a lot of them now, and
Yeah,
not just Paso. And I do think that some of it is that it makes great stories for social media. The visuals are super appealing. That whole like one farm, one unit idea, the kind of complete farm. I mean, it has a lot of great science behind it in terms of sustainability, but it is also like people like looking at cute animals. I mean,
of
we
course.
know like we know when the first lambs of the season are coming that okay, well, we know what like a handful of our next social media posts are going to be, and it starts great conversations. It starts the kinds of conversations we want to be having.
Yes, absolutely.
So you you have written and are writing for, it feels like, kind of a dizzying number of different outlets. Um, what do you think of as kind of the principal places where people who want to find your work can see you?
Definitely Wine Searcher, Liquor.com, Wine Advisor Network, and Wine Enthusiast online. Those are kind of the top ones that are focused on wine that I write for most frequently.
And I know sustainability, like that kind of intersection of wine and sustainability, is one of the areas that you really focus on. And I'm
Yeah.
curious if are there kind of wine sustainability stories that you feel like are ones that people should pay more attention to? Like things that are like things that either trends that are emerging um, or kind of intersections that you feel like are important but maybe aren't getting enough attention.
I would say that soil, the importance of quality soil. It doesn't sound like, the sexiest thing to talk about, but having a rich soil with a lot of microorganisms, that's the first, from what I understand, I'm not a farmer, but that's one of the kind of bedrocks of good wine. And a lot of that, I mean, it's done in a number of ways. It's done with animals, and instead of a lot of tractors in the farm, and compacting the soil. I think that, but the thing is, as you know, people want to talk about it when there's another element like animals brought in. So I think that's the key, is to getting driving consumer interest, is to make the story more interesting through, and I mean, I just did a story for Wine Advisor about worms, winemakers who are using these worm beds to filter out gray water and recycle water, because water is a huge problem across the world, but especially in California. And by using these waters these worms that basically filter out all of the, toxins and dirt and waste, not toxins, but the waste in the water, then they can reuse it for viticulture,
Yeah.
which, I mean, that's where I think we can get more people hooked into the environmental movement and committed to it. And also, I do think that there's resistance, and I am very guilty of this myself, is a resistance to tech. So whenever I hear about technology being introduced in the vineyard, I have an allergic reaction. And I think that there are very eco-friendly tech solutions out there, that we have to, as members of the industry, be more open to, and not just dismiss kind of because it's a machine. So
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I know, one of the places I see that show up is in a lot of the kind of remote soil monitoring pieces that allow even big commercial wineries to be much more targeted in the ways that they irrigate. I mean, one of the cool things about Paso is you got everybody from little guys who farm biodynamically and make 1,000 cases of wine to people like J. Lord that are making 2 million cases of wine. But if you look at some of the innovative things that the bigger wineries are doing, and the impact that they can have by reducing their water use in the vineyard by 30%. Like, I mean, if you're farming
thousands of acres and you're able to make a kind of a progressive improvement over what you're doing, the cumulative impact across a big winery is huge. And a lot of the tech pieces that they can afford to implement are big pieces that allow them to do stuff like that.
Absolutely. And I think that some of these tech companies also offer some of this software for free. I mean, you can get satellite imagery for free to monitor your water and monitor your weather. And people, I mean, small guys should be doing this. And, you know, that's the reality of the world that we're living in. Extreme weather is just part of our everyday life. And honestly, I mean, the fact that you emerged without a really devastating wildfire so far, I mean, that is, you know, like most wineries are now through harvest, and that feels like a huge victory for the wine industry, which is depressing. But
yeah,
you know,
I agree. I agree on both levels. It's wonderful that we did that most of wine country, with the exception of the Sierra foothills, which were impacted by smoke pretty badly this year. But Napa, Sonoma, Mendocino, and the whole Central Coast was in good shape, and it's scary to think that that's something to celebrate instead of treating the fires as the anomalous years.
Right. And I mean, one thing that I think is also key that happens in other countries, and I don't see happening enough in the US, is a little bit of government support for some of these programs that would really help protect the businesses against extreme weather. And I don't know if you're seeing more of that than you used to, like even on a local level.
No, I think mostly, even on a local level, it's left to either industry organizations or nonprofits to do a lot of the kind of resource sharing, rather than government.
Right.
I know there was a big piece in the federal budget that is currently being argued over, that was designed to help farms transition to more regenerative farming practices. So I think when that eventually makes its way out of Congress, we'll see how much of that is left. But I feel like regenerative farming is something that, a little bit like solar was, say, 15 years ago, that it needs a certain amount of government support to get people adopting it on a larger scale, because there are economies of scale that are only possible when more people are doing it. At which point it will have this kind of self-sustaining momentum, kind of the way that a lot of the renewable energy pieces you're starting to see now, where it's actually solar is the least expensive investment that you make in power at this point. So I do think there's room for a lot more government support, both at the kind of state and federal level. And I'm hopeful that will be one of the things that emerges from a budget agreement.
Me too.
So in terms of kind of conversations about soil, because I think that's really interesting. That's one area where it feels to me like wine might have an advantage because of the concept of terroir, where people are used to talking about like the signatures of place in a wine. I guess I don't really have a fully formed question there, except just to say that it feels like that's a way, like talking about terroir is a way of talking about the impact of soils on wine quality, and the fact that there's, like, far from you having to make a compromise between farming sustainably and making the best possible wine grapes, almost always the things that you're doing to farm organically or biodynamically or regeneratively, these are making soils that are better able to express their character of place, and making wines that are likely to be more unique and more terroir driven.
Yes. And I mean, I'm sure everyone has read some sort of review formally saying that organic and biodynamic wines taste better. I mean, they've done these blind tastings over and over again. And I'm sure you found this, and I've spoken to countless winemakers who've said that when they transitioned to organic and to biodynamic, it changed the quality of the fruit. It changed everything about the flavor, the final flavor of the wine. And I think we're slowly getting to the point where it's common knowledge. I mean, I think for most people, but I still think that, soil is something that people don't understand. And there's something kind of weird about the idea of having, a handful of soil with 2 billion, microorganisms or a million microorganisms. And I think that it's hard for us to make that leap if we're not scientists or farmers.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Um, the we have a similar story, a similar experience rather, because we've been farming organically since we started. So we don't have back when we were farming conventionally, we don't have that piece of it. But even in that transition between organic and biodynamic, we started off by transitioning a 20-acre slice of the vineyard with basically designed to be representative. So high points, low points, a bunch of different varieties. We transitioned 20 acres to farming fully biodynamically in 2010. And we were blown away by how those blocks kind of naturally floated to the top of our blind tasting rankings when we were doing our lot by lot evaluations at blending time, both in 2010, which we kind of passed off as interesting, but nothing conclusive. And then again in 2011. And that was really what spurred us to transition the whole vineyard to biodynamic by 2016. It was feeling like, if those lots showed so well, why are we not doing this everywhere? Why is this not a piece of every vineyard block's treatment every year?
And I know you know the answer to this. How was the cost? Is it a lot more expensive to farm that way? I mean, I'm sure, and of course it's a pain. There's a lot of stuff that you have to do that, but is it economically, did you have to increase the prices of your wine?
I mean, you think of what the prices are of our wines. Our wines are, they're not like $10 bottles of wine, but no. We sell our wines for between $25 and $60. Right. We're not talking $100 bottles of wine here, and It's economical for us. I feel like anybody who is selling their wines for $40, $50, $60, $70, these sorts of farming costs are not prohibitive by any stretch. And yes, it's a little more labor intensive. Yeah. But it depends a lot on how you're choosing to do it. And in almost every case, and this is true with both organics and biodynamics, the costs get less as time goes on because your own internal controls, your own ecosystem, your own beneficial insects, your own flowering plants, all of these things become better established each year. So you have to intervene less. So it's the most work in the early stages, and then becomes less work as time goes on. So there are transitional costs, and I think that's one of the reasons why having a certain amount of government support for people, helping people through those transitional costs, it would be a good idea. But in the long run, it is a bit more expensive, but it should not be prohibitive for anybody who's making premium wines.
That's a great answer. And I think it's a great point also that it's expensive at first, but then that diminishes over time. And I mean, you probably have to have a built-in labor force, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, it requires somewhat higher skilled vineyard teams. And right. we made the commitment back in 1996 to give our field crew year-round employment because we were doing so many things in the vineyard that we felt like it was just going to be a huge amount of churn to have to teach a new crew to do this every time we wanted to prune or every time we wanted to do an organic soap or oil application on the vineyard rather than spraying with pesticides. So we made that commitment early on, and we've never regretted it. It's something that we felt like was an investment that allowed us to get this incredibly committed and experienced and passionate vineyard crew, which is so integral to our success. But you're right. I mean, it would be hard to do a lot of these things if all you have is a like a migrant crew that's there for 2 weeks and then off to picking strawberries after that, and then you have to redo this. You have to redo this every time you bring crew onto the property. So I do think that's important, but there's so many other benefits to farming that way and working with your crew that way that feels like an investment that's easy to justify.
It also feels more human to have, the same group of people and to support them.
Yeah, and you think of that's one of the things I really like about the regenerative organic certification is that there is a human welfare component to it, a farm worker fairness component. So there was that biodynamic winery in Italy that got into a lot of public hot water, whatever this was, a couple of years ago, when it turned out they were celebrated for their farming, but they've been exploiting their workers for years.
Right.
And the idea in regenerative organics to try to create this umbrella of what the gold standard of farming is, from soil health to resource use to animal welfare, and then to the human component is I think what distinguishes it from everything else that we'd seen before.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I love that you guys are committed to that side of it too.
I mean, it's one of those things that if there's going to be a way that we invest like that, the investment in people has always, for me, been the easiest thing to justify. So I have one last question. I can't believe that it has already been half an hour, but it has already been half an hour, and I try to keep these limited.
Yeah.
So what's next for you? Are there things that you are particularly excited to explore that you haven't gotten to do yet, or projects that you have in the pipeline that you'd like to tease, or anything else? Kind of what's next in your world?
That's a good question. I'm actually trying to figure that out. I mean, I would like to have a longer form writing project, possibly at some point. Again, writing a book was fun, but my commitment at this point is really to just dive deeper, ever deeper into sustainability in wine. I mean, I think that's where we have to go as a planet, as people, and as, a mother. I really am passionate about creating a better future for our, children. So that's where I am right now, and we'll see. TBD.
Cool. And if people want to follow you or read what you're doing, obviously Instagram, it's easy. It's
Yeah.
Kathleen Wilcox. But where else can people follow you or find your work?
They can find me on WineSearcher, Liquor.com, Wine Advisor, Wine Enthusiast, and also a venture that I've launched with my friend and colleague Robin Shreves called Thinking Outside the Bottle. And so we have a website that, we just write kind of fun things, and we also do work with clients as well.
Cool. And other social media platforms?
Twitter, I'm Sustainable KW, and that's really pretty much it. I can't handle TikTok. I mean, I can't.
I haven't even tried.
Yeah, no, it's too much.
Cool. Well, awesome. Kathleen, thank you so much for taking a little time out of your Wednesday to chat. And I always look forward to reading everything that you write. I can't wait to see what's next.
Same. All right. Well, thank you. This was so much fun.
Awesome. So everybody who joined us this week, thank you so much. Come back in 2 weeks. I will have as my guest John Williams, the founder proprietor from Frog's Leap, who has been a pioneer in sustainability in so many ways. And I'm very much looking for that. Meanwhile, if you're in California, enjoy the rain this weekend. And if you're elsewhere, have a great week and weekend. So again, thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.